세션을 이 세션이 가지고 있는 그 의미를 제가 먼저 간단히 소개를 드리고 그 다음에 진행을 하겠습니다. 여기 계신 분들은 다 인사 관리에 대해서 관심이 많으시리라고 생각합니다. 저도 1967년에 이 경영학을 전공하기 위해서 학부에 들어간 다음부터 인사 관리에 대해서 공부를 좀 했는데, 제가 공부하던 60년대 그리고 70년대에는 인사 관리를 영어로 Personnel Management, 문자 그대로 인사 관리라고 표현을 했었습니다. 이 personnel이라는 단어가 중고등학교 때 배우지 않았던 단어가 돼가지고 사전을 통해서 personnel이 무엇인가 하는 것을 이렇게 찾던 기억이 지금도 생생하게 납니다. 그런데 그 다음에 70년대, 그러니까 이 60년대에는 이 퍼스널 매니지먼트라는 것은 기업체에서 대학이나 뭐 또 고등학교일 수도 있겠고 학교를 졸업한 사람들을 뽑아가지고 신입사원을 만든 다음에 그 신입사원에게 뭐 한 달이건 6개월이건 교육을 시켜가지고 적절하게 배치하는 그런 역할을 인사관리라고 얘기를 했습니다. 그런데 시간이 지나서 70년대가 되고 80년대가 되면서 이 인사관리라는 한국 표현은 그대로 있으면서 영어에서는 제가 70년대 미국 가서 공부할 때는 이미 personnel이라는 단어는 없어지고 Human Resources Management, HR Management라는 표현이 나왔습니다. 이걸 그대로 번역하면 인사관리가 아니라 인적 자원 관리가 되겠죠. 그래서 그 인적 자원 관리는 과거에 이렇게 사람을 뽑아가지고 배치하는 게 아니라 끊임없이 그 기업 또는 그 정부 기관에서 교육을 시켜가지고 이 구성원들의 업무 능력을 향상시키는 것을 목적으로 하는, 다시 말해서 교육받은 사람을 쓰는 게 중요한 게 아니라 그 능력을 개발시키는 그런 쪽으로 초점이 바뀐 것을 알게 됐습니다. 그러다가 이제 90년대에 와가지고 또 Human Resources라는 단어가 또 진화를 해서 이제 Human Capital이라는 표현을 쓰는 것을 보게 됐습니다. Human Resources와 Capital의 차이는 사람이 이제는 Financial Capital, 그러니까 돈 이상으로 중요한 그 조직의 자산이라는 거죠. 자산은 반드시 그 자산에서 그 부가가치가 창출돼야 되는 그런 원천이 됩니다. 그러니까 인력을 통해서 어떻게 부가가치를 창출하고 그것을 계량적으로 측정해서 그 가치를 높일 것인가 하는 식으로 사람에 대한 관리가 좀 더 정교해졌습니다. 이걸 번역을 하면 아마 인적 자본 관리라고 표현하게 되는데, 우리나라에서 이런 표현을 쓰지는 않지만 영어로는 이미 HR을 Human Capital이라고 쓰는 데가 많아졌습니다. 그런데 21세기가 되면서 또 바뀌었습니다. 최근에 와서는 이젠 Human Resources 또는 Human Capital이라는 단어보다 Talent라는 단어가 많이 사용이 됩니다. 그래서 이걸 번역하면 인재 전략, Talent Strategy가 되겠는데요. 이제는 과거와 같이 구성원들 전체를 어떻게 교육시키고 능력을 향상시켜서 가치를 높이느냐 하는 것도 중요하지만 그 이전에 이 조직을 이끌어 나가는 지도자, 그 리더를 어떻게 찾아내고 어떻게 만들어내고 또 어떻게 그 조직을 이끌어가게 하겠느냐 하는 그 지도자에 대한 그 관리라고 할까요? 지도자를 만들어내는 것에 대한 보다 정교한 접근을 지도하면서 이제는 그 한 명의 이 탤런트가 그 조직 전체의 사활을 좌우하고 또 더 나아가서 국가의 운명을 좌우하는 그런 철학 속에서 그 인사관리도 이제는 그 조직의 리더, 사회의 영웅을 만들어내는 그런 쪽으로 바뀌는 것을 봤습니다. 그런데 오늘 이 모임이 그 포럼이 글로벌 휴먼 리소스스 포럼이라는 그 큰 제목 하에 이 탤런트라는, 글로벌 탤런트라는 단어가 있는 걸 보고 이번 그 프로그램을 만드신 분들이 참 미래지향적으로 생각을 하셨구나 하면서 상당히 기뻤습니다. 오늘 이 네 분의 발표자는 바로 이러한 차원에서 정부와 기업에서 이 구성원은 물론이지만 그 조직을 이끌어가는 리더를 어떻게 만들어내고 또 능력을 발휘할 수 있는 조건을 만들어내느냐 하는 쪽에 대해서 좋은 얘기를 해주실 것으로 기대를 합니다. 그래서 우선 첫 번째 발표자로서는 현재 덴마크의 교육부 장관을 역임하고 계시는 Mr. His Excellency Bertel Haarder를 모셨습니다. 이 하더 장관께서는 여러 가지 기록을 가지고 계시는데 가장 특징적인 기록은 지금 덴마크에서 장관직을 16년째 수행하고 계시면서 그것도 한 가지의 부서가 아니라 무임소에서 시작해서 자연과학, 교육, 그다음에 European Affairs, Development Affairs, Research, Science and Research 등등 다양한 그 부서의 장관직을 맡으면서 이 덴마크의 미래를 책임지고 계십니다. 오늘 이 글로벌 지식사회 교육 정책이라는 주제를 가지고 이제부터 15분 말씀을 해 주시겠습니다.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank the Korean government and the organizers for having asked me to set us off at this very important discussion about globalization and human resources. Globalization, I believe, presents promising options for business, citizens and institutions. A majority of enterprises are now organized transnationally. They employ staff with different national backgrounds. Cross-border production, international networks, and strategic alliances are now recognized as preconditions for growth. International competition is increasing. Mobility of international labor will increase, and that is certainly also the case in the growing international education markets. The number of students studying abroad will rise in the years to come. In order to make the best out of this, to reap the benefits from this promising development, the Danish Prime Minister last year set up a globalization commission composed of 26 experts, industrialists, union leaders, employers, university people, and 5 ministers, the finance minister, the economics minister, the research minister, and myself. And the whole commission was chaired by the Prime Minister himself. We met for 24 days over 1 year. We sat there for 160 hours. We invited expert panels to inspire us, and we ended up with 350 concrete proposals as to how we could improve the growth layers of Danish society. And out of those proposals, 189 dealt with education. The headline was progress, innovation, and cohesion. The aim was to set up a comprehensive and coherent strategy for the Danish response to globalization. Innovation and creativity involving research and development are necessary conditions for growth in our times. It's reflected in the priorities in our globalization strategy. Successful innovation depends on more than just allocation of funds. We also need to ensure new ways of cooperation between the research community, education, and business and industries. We need ongoing innovation and research and development in education itself, just as we need leadership, evaluation standards, and knowledge about what works. Seen from an individual's point of view, globalization offers new opportunities for developing the personal potential of the individual. It's a gift for all who are prepared to act, take responsibility, and perceive the world in new creative patterns. Conditions will change, and those who adapt and take risks will benefit from it. These years we see how young, talented individuals can create and utilize new business opportunities. From a modest start, they make things grow for the benefit of themselves and the local communities and the country. Today, the message is clear to ambitious young persons with innovative skills: don't look for a job, look for customers. We should support this entrepreneurial attitude among the young generation. The point of departure is education, where children and young people from the very beginning learn to take responsibility, learn to cooperate and ask questions, learn to challenge their own abilities, learn to look for opportunities rather than constraints. Just as Kunihiko just said before the break. But education cannot do it alone. Education must interact with the labor market and the needs as they are understood by the labor market partners. If we can manage to make labor market stakeholders cooperate, then much can be achieved. In Denmark, we have experienced that wage competition and outsourcing has taken many jobs out of the country and put many people out of work. But even more jobs have been created in their place. And the new jobs are better paid, but they also require better qualifications. Why have all these new jobs appeared? Well, we think it's due to our very flexible labor market. Employers are free to hire and fire thanks to our social security system that takes care of the individual and offers extensive re-education opportunities. We call this flexicurity. Employers can hire and fire. We allow flexibility because we have extensive social security and re-education opportunities. And flexibility and security, that makes flexicurity. Other countries have looked at this model because, with some surprise, they have noticed that our unemployment has almost disappeared, and we now have a new problem, that is shortage of labor, shortage of apprentices, shortage of wage earners in many areas, especially skilled workers. Now, as you can see from this chart, the green line is the disappearance of jobs. The red line is the appearance of jobs. And this development has continued very much over the last 3 or 4 years. So now we have shortage of labor, as I said. Now, initial education must of course provide a good starting point for all. After completing compulsory education, students must have obtained key competences needed for success in their next steps into education, work and civic life, including the social and entrepreneurial skills I mentioned earlier. We have launched a number of initiatives in this sector, and in order to monitor how it works, a new National Authority for Evaluation and Quality has been set up. As you can see, it's well justified for us in Denmark to have high expectations to the outcomes of our schools. Danish investments in education are generous and second to none in the OECD family. In this table we show the public investment in education related to GNP, and if we choose other parameters, it's the same story. Money in the educational sector is obviously not a problem. Last week we made a big compromise in the Danish Parliament. We have increased the pension age in the long term. Therefore, we now can afford to invest even more in education and research. And we have decided that from now on till 2012. And that is good for education to have long-term planning. We want to have not only 80% of an age cohort complete an upper secondary school exam or vocational education or university education. We want 95% to complete such an education. Today it's 80%. We want 95% to complete an education. But when we look at this, we should not only think of university education. We should remember vocational education. Many countries forget this, but based on my country's experience, vocational education is essential to economic development, and it's essential for the individual, for those who have no academic aspirations, but who can still become very good skilled workers or technicians or bachelors or whatever. In Denmark, the aim is to develop the old apprenticeship system and create a transparent system with no dead-end streets and designed in a lifelong learning perspective. More young people should be encouraged to choose the vocational route. Vocational education must be practice-oriented. The apprenticeship system should be developed. We should make sure that the apprenticeship system is open also for those who had not so good marks, not so good grades in primary school. And at the same time, vocational education should be attractive for the brightest students, those who would like to go on from vocational education to become technicians or practical engineers or even civil engineers, and in the health sector, those who would like to go on to become nurses and maybe even later doctors. It's important to have mobility on the horizontal basis so that you can change from one education to another, but also vertically so that you can continue your education, that you are not faced with dead-end streets. Now, of course, here I got the chart for the vocational education, I'm sorry. Now, of course, in higher education, internationalization is important. But don't forget that also apprentices need to go abroad. I'm very happy that this morning I have signed a memorandum of understanding with my colleague here in Korea. And that provides for exchange of teachers and students also in the vocational education sector. We should provide for exchange opportunities. It's very important what the OECD and UNESCO has done by setting standards for international quality assurance and comparability. We should develop that also in other areas. And we should remember, in vocational education and in higher education, to provide for lifelong learning opportunities. In the information society, we need to develop a strong tradition, new habits for lifelong learning. I think in this area we have something to offer in my country. We have managed to engage the population in ongoing education and training. We have managed with some success to engage also the low-skilled and those with negative experiences from school in lifelong learning. And in order to stimulate this, last week we agreed in the Danish Parliament on putting a huge sum of money on the table for the labor market partners. We have told the labor market partners, and there's a vast majority behind this, that if they next spring can negotiate new wages and set a certain percentage aside for lifelong learning for the individual, then all that money belongs to them. If they don't, then we take the money back. The comments from the labor unions have been positive. So I think just as in the 80s it became normal to negotiate contributions to pension as part of a wage settlement, now it will be just as normal to negotiate a percentage for re-education, for lifelong learning. If that is the case, then we have taken a very important step forward, because then it's not just the taxpayers who have to pay for lifelong learning, it is also the individuals, it's the unions, it's the employers who have to make sure that they make the most out of this money. Now, we of course would like to welcome talented foreign students. More and more courses in Denmark are taught in English, and we offer scholarships to bright foreign students. Last week, again, we decided to allow Danish students to take along with them to other countries an amount equal to the cost of teaching in Denmark. So a student from now on has automatically money to pay for tuition at educational institutions all over the world. So we want to facilitate that Danish students can go abroad, and by changing our courses and teaching many of the courses in English, we hope that also students from abroad will come to Denmark. We want to remain an active player in international cooperation in education. And I would like to emphasize the OECD and the ASEM, in which Korea and Denmark work together, where we share experience and discuss policy lines. And as a spin-off from the Asia-European Meeting 3, the ASEM Meeting 3, Denmark and Korea have developed the Global Adult Teacher Education concept, which will now be introduced to other countries and regions such as China, Chile, and Bolivia. We have also set up, as I said, a memorandum for understanding between our countries, which was signed by my Korean colleague and myself this morning. We have great expectations, and we do expect further inspiration and exchange of good practice as we move ahead. It's my hope that this Forum for Human Resource Development will bring us further down that road. I wish you a fruitful meeting, and thank you again for your attention.
지금 하더 장관께서 3시 비행기를 타기 위해서 12시 반에는 떠나셔야 됩니다. 그런데 다른 분들 발표를 듣고 나면은 질의할 기회가 없기 때문에 아주 예외적으로 여러분께서 이 하더 장관에게 질문하실 분이 있으면 한두 명만 먼저 받고 우리 하더 장관을 보내드리는 게 나을 것 같습니다. 질문 있으면 해주시죠. 여러분이 질문 하나 준비하실 동안 제가 질문을 하나 하겠습니다. Mr. Haarder, I suppose that it is better for us to give you some questions and then let you leave. I'll have one question. That is, I think this flex security is a novel concept which is very logical and desirable. The problem is that among the three factors is flexibility of hiring and firing, job security, and lifelong education. They should go together. When you first start, the labor union would have some suspicion of whether this will be implemented. How did you convince the labor union that they will have job security while the firing especially becomes flexible?
Well, that's a very good question. The Union of Unskilled Workers have been somewhat reluctant, but particularly the Metal Workers Union and other unions of skilled workers, they have seen clearly for many years that they gain from globalization. They have seen that when jobs disappear, they should not ask for those jobs to reappear. They should ask for better jobs to appear in their place. It's simply now part of their rhetoric also when they discuss the future, that in order to get better salaries, they must be open to globalization. That is the road to wealth, not only for the country as a whole, but also for skilled workers. And the message to the unskilled workers is, of course, that we will offer lifelong learning opportunities. Some cannot read. We'll make sure that if they didn't learn to read in school, we will have ample opportunity for them to learn to read and to develop their qualifications. And also, we should aim at real competences, because some unskilled workers, in fact, are quite competent in certain areas, and we should recognize that and not tell them that for the rest of their lives they are unskilled. So there are ways in which also the unskilled can accept this, and they have been quiet. They have accepted the globalization strategy, as it has been accepted also by all the public employees organizations. It has not been easy, but it helped to sit for 24 days, altogether 150 hours, with 5 ministers and union leaders and employers and experts. I mean, that helped. And then with a little bread and beer, etc., that helps.
It seems that there are 3 lessons that we can learn from you. 1, the crisis has to be there. Second, you targeted those unskilled and probably those who are deprived of education as the first target. And then the sequence, that is, the lifelong education was first provided, and then the rest went smoothly.
And And remember, we were able to put a lot of money on the table because we reformed the pension system.
Nice.
And since we now don't have to save as much money for old age pension in the future, then we can invest some of that money here and now. That has also been accepted as part of a national compromise between the centre-right government and the Labour Party.
You have to have a deep pocket to start with. Great. 질문 있으시면 한 분만 받겠습니다. 예. 여기 마이크 좀 갖다 주시죠. 자.
This is actually from the Daegu Cyber University. I'm president of the Daegu Cyber University. Your presentation is very much inspiring and illuminating. And also you mentioned and emphasized the importance of the lifelong studies in your country. So as a matter of fact, I believe so lifelong, most effective way of lifelong education is through e-learning studies, I believe. So what do you see the prospect of e-learning and what is the current situation of e-learning in your country? So e-learning study is very much growing in my country. So do you have any kind of cyber universities in your country also? Because there is very big tendencies in Korea that is e-learning and as well as cyber universities is growing very fast. Because many people can study anywhere, any place, without going to the school. So it is very effective way of studying for lifelong. So do you have any idea for that? Thank you.
E-learning and distance education is certainly an integral part of the strategy. We have not, we're not finished with it. We have to work in that direction. But I have noticed with great satisfaction that more and more e-learning programs are being produced and translated into more and more languages. There was one English learning program that has now been translated into 32 languages. And the company can even make a profit on it. And the ministry, of course, tries to stimulate the production of e-learning programs and try to make them available also in English. But it's certainly something we have to build up.
Okay, thank you very much. 조금 아까 말씀드린 바와 같이 하더 장관께서는 12시 반에 떠나셔야 되기 때문에 우리가 먼저 박수를 좀 쳐드리는 게 좋지 않을까 생각합니다. I'd like to give you big hands. You are free to leave anytime you may. So perhaps I just stay here. Right. 자, 두 번째로는 왓슨 와이어트의 최고 경영자이신 존 헤일리 선생님을 모시겠습니다. 여러분 잘 아시다시피 왓슨 와이어트는 기업체에게 유능한 인재를 공급해주는 그런 산업에서 선도적인 그런 역할을 하는 그 컨설팅 회사입니다. 이 존 헤일리 사장님은 29년 전에 이 왓슨 와이어트에 입사하셔가지고 지금까지 이 왓슨 와이어트가 오늘의 그런 선도적인 역할을 하는데 큰 역할을 하신 분입니다. 자, 이제부터 또 이 존 헤일리 회장님의 말씀을 듣도록 하겠습니다. Now, the podium is yours.
Good morning, everyone. I'd like to thank the organizers of this for inviting me to participate in this session. This is a session that is particularly exciting for somebody in my position because as the moderator mentioned, Watson Wyatt is a human capital consulting firm, and indeed we're a global human capital consulting firm. We have about 90 offices around the world, and we consult in most major countries. But we, with our workforce of about 6,000 or so consultants around the world, we also have our own global human resource management problems. And so today I'm going to try to talk a little bit about what we tell the clients, and I'll try to weave in a little bit of some of the issues that we face too in terms of managing our business. What I'd like to do is to just start with a little overview of one of the things that we see as a backdrop to what's going on in human capital and in thinking about that. Our very first speaker this morning, Professor Fukuyama, mentioned this, and it's the effect of the aging of the world and the changing demographics. At Watson Wyatt, this has been a particular passion and a particular interest of ours for many years. I was talking with a colleague the other day, one of the fellows who did a lot of work for this starting back in about 1990 for us, and we were reminiscing about how when we first started talking about global aging, people seemed to think that it was something that didn't matter, and they didn't really care too much about it. And nowadays, I think it's really grabbed the attention of the world. Every developed country in the world is going to go through some significant aging. The U.S. is probably the country that has the best demographics of any of the developed world, but even there we'll see a fairly significant change. In Europe, we're going to see some rather dramatic change over the first part of the 21st century in terms of the population getting significantly older. And there's two things that are happening. One is, it's not just that the population is getting older, but it's also because there have been decades of lower fertility rates, we're going to see smaller working age populations in the future in most of the developed world than we ever saw before. Now, if you think about some of the great economic miracles that you've seen, you know, the East Asian tigers, for example, and their growth, at least half of that growth can probably be attributed to what you would call the demographic dividend. That is to say that they had this great influx and this big increase in their working age population, and it led to this terrific increase in economic activity. What we're going to be seeing in a lot of the economies of Europe is shrinking populations. Germany is going to go from 51 million of their working age population as of 2000 to about 43 million in 2030. Now this shrinking in the working age population is also going to be occurring as you're getting this big increase in the number of retirees that they've got to support. So from two ends, you're going to be putting increasing burdens on the working age population. I think that's going to have significant effects on where people locate their operations. We're already seeing this with clients that we talk to, where they think about, you know, if you're locating a plant in a country, that's a long-term investment. Demographics are a long-term effect, and people are starting to take that into account. Over closer to home here, Japan is going to go from a working age population of about 79 million in 2000 to about 65 million in 2030. And at the same time, we're going to be seeing some incredible increases in other countries. India and China. If I take India and China and look at the increase in their working age population over these first 3 decades, just the increase is going to be greater than the combined working age populations currently of the U.S. and the original European Union. So we're seeing dramatic shifts that are going to occur. This was brought home to me at a meeting I was at in Brussels a few years ago, and the Office of Economic and Financial Affairs for the European Commission put together a projection of what they thought would happen to global output and what that distribution would look like as a result of the aging of the developed world. And as you can see, I said the U.S. has the best demographics of the developed world, and in fact, they'll still be seeing some slight increases in working age population, and their share of output increases a little bit. But Japan is cut in half from about 8% to about 4%, and you can see the EU going from about 18% to 10%. And I think it's these kinds of thinking about what happens to your relative importance in the world, what happens to your populations, and how you provide for an older population which is going to have significant needs, not just for retirement, but also for health care, that has really motivated a lot of politicians to get interested in this. Just to follow up on something that I think Professor Fukuyama mentioned earlier, even the countries that have reasonably favorable demographics now, I mean, I think people think of China as a source of a lot of people there, a lot of potential workers, actually some very attractive cost basis. But in fact, in 2014, China's working age population will start to decline. Their overall population will grow for a long time, but their working age population will start to decline. I'm on the chair of the U.S.-China Business Council, and we do a survey of our members every year, and one of the things that we ask them what's the most important things that they're concerned about with their operations in China. And this year, for the first time, human resources has emerged as the number one. It's even jumped over intellectual property rights. So this is something that is very much, I think, on the mind of business. Just one last thing, I think McKinsey talked about the war for talent in the 1990s, and that was driven by a U.S. working age population that had grown at about 1.75% per year in the 1980s, and it dropped to about 1.25% per year in the 1990s. This decade, it's going to grow at less than 0.75% a year, and it's going to grow even slower in future decades. And as I said, that's the country with probably the best demographics. So I think we face some real challenges there, and we're going to have some real locations. What this really means is that business is going to be locating in places that are not where they are today. I mean, I think that's one of the conclusions that you have to have about that. And then that's going to raise some issues about how do you manage this global talent pool and how do you handle that. We did a survey of people in our Asia-Pacific region recently to check with business leaders. And just as the survey that we did in China for the U.S.-China Business Council, we found that HR was the number one priority that was on the mind of business leaders. They thought that talent recruitment and retention is something that everybody identifies as one of the key issues. Now, it's interesting because people tend to lump these together, and I think we're starting to see some more creative thinking about some of these. Walmart, which is famous for how well they manage their workforce, the traditional way people think about it is you have attraction, you attract the right employees in, you develop them, and then that leads to retention. Walmart has sort of said, maybe we need to think about this the other way. Maybe what we need to think about is we focus first on retention. That leads to great development opportunities for people, and then that attracts other people to work here. I think the answer isn't necessarily one or the other. It's probably just thinking of this as more as a holistic operation. Global talents is another issue that was high on the minds in our survey, and we have this tremendous number of people that we see in some, particularly in some of the Asian economies. But at the same time as we have a tremendous number of people, we may also find a real lack of the talents that are most needed by global organizations. You can particularly see that in the financial services industry. If you go to China today and you're looking for people who have the right kind of financial skills, who are good in English, which is necessary for the global financial services industries, and who have the right kind of mobility, you find that that market is really underserved. One of the barriers that I think we particularly face in the area in, say, Korea or Japan is some of the homogeneity of the population. And the homogeneity, while it's a strength in some ways, is also a barrier to working in a diverse global organization. So I think people need to look at that. Our Korean colleagues, when they reported back from this survey, were particularly passionate about what they referred to as the language barrier, that in fact there wasn't enough attention They felt being put by either government or business on the importance of being able to converse and work in English, which is really the global business language. And then finally, we have issues of regulation that we need to deal with and that people are worried about. As an example, in Bangkok, there are limits on how many people we can hire who are foreigners. So if we have a relatively small operation in Bangkok. If we bring in one person, we might not be able to bring in another one, or we'd have to switch people off to do that. And if you're trying to create a climate and a culture where you're getting a top-performing global organization, you need to have flexibility to bring in the right people and to do that. From Watson Wyatt, I'm going to mention a couple things quickly about some of the work we've done in this area. I hope to leave some time for questions when we get into more of it. But we did work on a human capital index survey a number of years ago, and this was really the first time that people had answered the question of, do specific human capital practices actually drive better business performance? Because in fact, there's a lot of surveys that get done, and sometimes people will say, well, this is a best company to work for, or this is a good place to work for. And the real question in our minds was, well, so what? I mean, if you're a good company to work for, but in fact it doesn't mean that the business performs better, that's not necessarily such a good thing for the business leaders. We actually found that certain human capital management practices were indeed highly correlated with better financial performance. And it was a fairly robust correlation. We've tested it in the US, in Europe, throughout Asia Pacific. It's robust across all geographic regions against levels of economic development and stages of the business cycle. And most important, as we got more and more data, and we started doing this over many years, we found it's not just a correlation, it's actually a leading indicator of good financial performance. The areas that we might be talking about here are recruiting excellence, employee development, effective communication, and efficient use of technology. One of the things that we also have done a lot of work on is the whole issue of employee engagement and getting them, looking at employee attitudes. We've been doing this around the world. The latest study was just completed in 2006 and again covered Asia Pacific, North America, and Europe. And it does show again a relationship between high employee engagement and financial results. Engaged employees, who are they? They're the kind that go above and beyond. They're highly focused, demonstrate innovation, help other team members, take on new innovation, offer ideas for improvement. Let me mention quickly three things that tend to drive them. And the first one I think is rather interesting. It's customer focus. Now you tend to think of customer focus as something that it's the company and its customers that it's out there dealing with. But actually, organizations that are highly customer focused also tend to build in a great alignment with the employees. Because when you think about it, customers experience a company and its values by their interaction with the employees. So in fact, one of the best ways to be a client-focused company is you first communicate what you want to do to your employees, and then they're the ones who touch the customers all the time. So organizations that have high degree of customer focus are ones that employees feel a pride in their work, they have a sense of job security, a sense of opportunities, and also a sense of alignment. The second thing is senior leadership. When the senior leaders use frequent and highly visible communications to share a sense of the company direction. It is impossible for senior leaders to over-communicate, in my opinion. You just can't do enough of that, and it's the thing about just keep on repeating what you've told them. And finally, an effective reward system. An effective reward system doesn't just mean more and more of money or something like that, but it means understanding what employees value, and in understanding means understanding what the employees that are supporting your business strategy value. So making sure you're not just getting employees with talents, but you're getting employees with talents who fit in with your organization and your team. Effective rewards model, again, for example, one of the things we want to understand is employee preferences for rewards. And the preferences for rewards among, say, top-performing high-potential employees are actually different than those for employees generally. And so when we're focusing on this issue of talent and of how we build the right global talent pool, one of the things we need to understand is who is the reward system built for and who are the ones that it's most important to retain. Understanding the impact of demographics. As people get older, their relative value for, say, benefit programs versus direct pay changes, the relative value of life-work balance changes, and we need to understand those. And we need to understand not just what it is today, but what it's going to be in the future. Let me just conclude on just a couple quick notes. First of all, as I mentioned, there's going to be a big change as to where where people have located their operations, where their employees are coming from. The demographics just tell us that that's going to happen. From that sense, the various labor markets around the world really represent a portfolio of human capital. And I think just as investment managers manage their portfolios on a basis of diversity and comparative analysis, I think business leaders are going to have to do that with their human resources. If this is successful, it's going to bring advantages not just to the developed world where a lot of these companies are headquartered, but it's also going to bring a lot of advantages to the developing world. Thank you.
자, 토론은 조금 이따 하기로 하고 세 번째 주제 발표자를 모시겠습니다. 세 번째 주제는 후지전자의 최고 경제를 역임하신 구니히코 사와 선생님입니다. 이 사와 선생님 역시 1959년, 지금부터 47년 전에 후지전자에 입사하신 이후 지금까지 계속 후지전자를 발전시키고 최고 경제까지 하셨습니다. 오늘 이 사와 선생님으로부터 후지전자의 인재 관리에 대한 말씀을 듣도록 하겠습니다.
ご紹介いただきました富士電機ホールディングス株式会社の沢でございます。今回このフォーラムのオープニングセッションで講演する機会を与えられ、大変光栄に思っております。今回のフォーラムの共通テーマは、グローバルなタレント、グローバルな繁栄であります。企業に所属する私に与えられたテーマは、グローバル人材の確保であります。外国の職場にうまく適応できる人材を国内でいかに効果的に育成・教育するかを模索してほしいとのことでありました。皆様はグローバルな人材とは何かと問われたら何と答えるでしょうか。多分皆様のうちの多くの方は次のように答えるでありましょう。すなわち、外国語の会話や読み書きの能力を十分に持っていること、諸外国の地理、歴史、文化や習慣等についての知識と興味を十分に持っていること、世界のどこででも通用する優れた専門能力を持っていること、誰とでも親しくなれ、どこにあっても生活を楽しめること、好奇心や夢を持ってその実現のために挑戦し努力することなどの要件を満たす人が グローバル人材であるというでありましょう。もちろん、今述べられた要件は非常に重要なものであり、今回のフォーラムにおいても多くの方からこれらについて問題提起され、意見が述べられ、議論がなされることと思います。しかし、私はこれらの要件以上に大切な絶対的な要件があると考えております。今日のオープニングセッションにおける私の講演は、この点に焦点を絞って、グローバル人材とは何か、そしてそれはどのようにして育てられるのかについて話をいたします。この問題について考えるときに、私たちは根源的なところまで遡って考えてみる必要があります。まず最初に考えるべきことは、人は何のために生きるのか、人はいかに生きるべきかということであります。人間は生まれた時から社会の一員であり、親や兄弟や周りの人たちの愛を受け、助けられて成長するのであります。そして自分もまた同様に他の人を愛し、他の人々を幸せにするために尽くす存在になるように努めつつ成長するのであります。また別の観点からしますと、人間は他の動物や植物を犠牲にして生きているのであり、地球上の水も空気もすべてこれらの命あるものと共有しながら生きているのであります。したがってこれらの命あるものに感謝し、その犠牲を必要最小限にとどめ、地球環境の保全にも努めながら生活する必要があります。生まれてから学業を終え就職するまでの期間は、このようなことをしっかりと身につけさせるための教育と訓練の期間であります。人は他の人たちと互いに愛し合い、幸せにし合ってこそ生きる価値があるのであります。そしてその生き方は、他の人の愛に感謝し、私たちの命を保つために与えられている命あるものや水や空気などの恵みにも感謝するものでなければなりません。そして人はこのような生き方ができていると実感するときに、喜びと充実感を持つのであります。この喜びと充実感は、できるだけ若い時から持てるように導くことが大切であります。今まで述べてきたことからお分かりいただけると思いますが、人は他の人々のために生きるべきであり、他の人々を幸せにする存在でなければなりません。そしてまた、私たちの命を保つために与えられた恵みに感謝し、その犠牲を最小限にとどめるよう努めなければなりません。企業はこうした人々の社会における活動の場であります。企業の本質的な存在意義は、その活動によって人間社会に貢献すること、また 地球環境保全に貢献することにあります。それぞれの企業は、企業活動を通して人間社会に安心、安全、便利さ、快適さ等を提供し、人々を幸せで豊かな生活に導くものでなければなりません。また、地球上のすべての生き物が将来にわたって生き続けられる環境を保ちうるようにするものでなければなりません。今やほとんどの企業の活動は国境を越え、ワールドワイドに広がっております。すなわち、企業は今やグローバルな社会の一員であり、世界の人々と環境保全に役立つ有益な存在でなければなりません。そして、企業の人間社会と環境保全への貢献に対して、社会から支払われる対価が企業活動に要するコストを上回れば、それが企業の利益になると考えるべきであります。企業の利益が、企業の目的が、ただ利益を得ることになってはなりません。利益は企業の社会や地球環境への貢献の程度を社会が評価して与えられる対価によってもたらされると考えるべきであります。したがって企業経営者は自らの企業活動が社会に貢献しているか、その貢献をより大きくするにはどうすればよいかを常に考え、そのために有用な人材を求めるべきであります。このような考え方に基づきますと、その企業で働く人々は、自分は他の人々を幸せにするために働くのだ。自分は自らの働きを通して人間社会、ひいては人類はもとより地球上のすべての生き物に貢献するのだという信念を持ち、行動することが必要であります。働くことに対するこのような価値観を持った人を得ることこそ、国内はもとより世界中どこにあっても通用するグローバル人材の確保だと私は確信するのであります。私は企業に所属もするものですから、人々の働きの場の代表例として企業を取り上げて説明しましたが、企業でなくても官庁でも教育機関でも国際機関でもその他何であっても同じことであります。ともすればグローバル人材というと、先ほど述べたように語学力があるとか、諸外国の地理、歴史、文化や習慣等についての知識と興味を十分に持っているとか、世界のどこででも通用する専門能力を持っていることだと考えられがちですが、このような能力はある程度の年齢になってからでも身につけることができます。しかし、誰とでも親しくなれ、どこにあっても生活を楽しめることや、好奇心や夢を持ってその実現のために努力すること、そしてグローバル人材として最も重要な人はどのように生きるべきか、また人は何のために働くのかといった人生観や働くことに対する価値観は、幼児の頃からの両親による家庭教育、学校教育、そして社会の大人たちの 模範的な生き様によってしか身につけさせられないと考えるのであります。今日、日本に限らず、経済的先進国と呼ばれる諸国では、家庭における教育や学校教育で、このような人間として最も大切な心の教育が不十分であり、その結果、社会における大人たちの生き様が大変問題であるとされております。私は韓国の実情は分かっておりませんが、もし同様な問題を抱えているとするならば、できるだけ早く具体的な対策がなされるべきであります。グローバル人材の育成、教育は、その基本はいかに生きるべきか、何のために働くのかという問いに答える人生観や労働の価値観を持ち、誰とでも仲良く、どこででも楽しく、そして好奇心と夢を持って挑戦する人を育てることに他ならない。しかもそれはグローバル人材と言わなくても、社会に有用な人材と言っても同じことなのであります。そしてそれは学校や家庭や学校、さらに社会全体が常に心がけ努めなければならないことであり、政府のたゆみない啓蒙と実践も必要だというのが私が申し上げたいことであります。本日の私の問題提起が今回のフォーラムの趣旨にかなっていることを願って私のスピーチを終えます。ありがとうございました。
네, 고맙습니다. 마지막으로 네 번째 발표자는 유네스코 사무차장을 맡고 계시는 피터 플림튼 스미스입니다. 이 스미스 사무차장님은 그 버몬트 주에서 교육관계 그리고 상원의원 또 부지사로서 활동을 하신 다음에 이 교육을 전담하는 이 유네스코의 요직을 지금 맡고 계십니다. 우리 그 좀 더 기업보다 국가보다 더 큰 그 유엔 기관의 그 책임자로서 이 글로벌 인재에 대한 말씀을 듣도록 하겠습니다.
Excellencies, honored guests and colleagues, it's a great pleasure for me to be here as the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, and I'm honored to have been invited to join such distinguished company to discuss the critical issues addressed by this conference, Human Capital in the Knowledge Society. I do so with the humility that comes with the knowledge that crossing the great divide that we face between the demand and supply in the workforce is a tall and a complicated order. Moreover, I am sobered by the fact that the work we do here this week, as important as it is the easy work. Sharing perspectives and experience, discussing and analyzing the problem, getting the data, doing the research, is the easy part. Creating learning and working environments that are rich in texture and purposely intended to promote and sustain the deep needs of society, building a culture of peace, and developing the intellectual and behavioral capacity of the broad population, including the workforce, is far, far more difficult. Too often, we describe the need for new structures and then ignore our own words in practice. Too often, we choose the familiar and the comforting over the new and the different. If, however, we want new societies of educated and thinking and feeling people, if we want productivity and opportunity for the many, then we must harness the transformational potential of the times that we are in. Indeed, the great irony we face as we stand here today is that the conventional approaches to education and training, to education and workforce development that have gotten us where we are will not, however, get us where we need to go in the future. We need to live the change that we have made in order to continue the revolution of economic and social opportunity that has been generated. This is only common sense. If you want to compete in the Tour de France, you can't do it riding a tricycle. And if you want to run a marathon, you can't do it wearing hiking boots. If we aspire to world-class results in education and training, to meet new global standards and expectations, then we should be ready to do the hard work of developing and implementing, monitoring and improving the new practices, understanding the transformation of time and space and responsibility that is unlocked by the technological revolution still in its infancy that will make us successful. This is an area where UNESCO's education sector stands ready to partner with any who come forward, beginning today and in the years ahead. Let me offer a few points to underscore the situation that we are in human terms. First, take the bull by the horns. And it may be that I don't know what to do. I'm out of my league.
Right one, the right arrow at the top.
The right arrow. No. Okay. Aha. There it is. We have a saying in my country, take the bull by the horns. It suggests that if you want to succeed, you have to face your challenges directly and seize them with sureness and force. But this saying carries another implication, and that is that if you don't take the bull by the horns, the bull will gore you and hurt you. If we're serious about the human capital issues raised in the conference prospectus, then we should understand that a failure to act will lead to a larger failure in the years ahead, economically, civically, and socially. Second, Darwin doesn't care. Why is this so? Because Darwin didn't care what we say, it's what we do relative to others that matters. Recently in the International Herald Tribune, a writer described what he thought was an economically short-sighted and failed business orientation in certain parts of the European continent. He argued that even if economic and educational policy satisfied the short-term needs, the long-term impact favored the more competitive, flexible, and enlightened policies of other regions. We live in a time when a decade is an eon, when standing still equals falling behind, and when falling behind in the education and human resource race is a fatal blow to a country's or a region's future. Darwin's assertion that the future goes to those who are flexible, not the smartest or the fastest, defies the rhetoric of politics or business or education, and it scorns the short-term success at the expense of long-term strength. Because Darwin doesn't care. He doesn't play favorites. He describes the conditions for success, and his theory rewards the long-term competitive advantage. We need workers who think and thinkers who work. Our schools and our non-formal programs need to educate thinkers who can work and workers who can think. When we began globally considering the issue of educational results 20 to 30 years ago, we could afford poor alignment between schools' curricula and the needs of the workplace or the larger society. But those days are over. For the first time in history, a failure to closely match human characteristics needed with the types of work to be formed will have very negative consequences. And if we want and seek a thoughtful citizenry and workforce that learns throughout life and contributes to the continuous renewal of their company or their organization or their society, then we must want the same things for the society and the people around us. You cannot grow a strong plant in a garden of weakness. More educated people are more socially, civically, and economically powerful. They engage in the society around them more, and they are more economically successful. So as focused as we might be on the bottom line, we must be mindful of the societal bottom line as well and work to strengthen that base. Where will we find the new workforce? We need to bring the margin to the mainstream. Of course there is fierce competition for those already trained and proven. Countries and businesses recruit and compete for existing talent. But pursuing that policy alone, I would suggest, is short-sighted and insufficient. Until new workers are brought to the table, there will never be enough people. We must succeed in our education and training programs with those who have historically been left at the margin of society. The pathway to a knowledge society workforce lies in widening the mainstream of opportunity to more people, bringing those previously excluded to the table of opportunity through education and training. If success is the objective, our business goals, our educational goals, must be inextricably connected to larger social goals. Our host country, the Republic of Korea, is a superb example of such success. Its education and training programs in the last 40 years broke free from tradition, focused on preparing adaptable and thinking workers. As we all know, the results have taken the Republic of Korea to new and undreamt of levels of prosperity. Some of the problems that we face as we consider these things. Not enough teachers. A recent study completed by the UNESCO Institute of Statistics located in Montreal, Quebec, Canada, put the teaching crisis clearly in perspective. 10 years from today, the global demand for teachers will exceed the supply by 15 to 18 million people. So the one thing we know for sure is that in 10 years, there will be fewer teachers per student, not more. This assumes that our ability to train and reward teachers stays constant or even improves slightly. And when you look at this data in terms of hard-to-teach subject areas, math, science, literacy, technology, special needs, the ratios get much worse. The hard truth is that people with master's degrees in these specialty areas will opt for the private sector or for other high-paying careers in most cases, leaving hundreds of millions of children without a trained teacher in the classroom. These are the horns of the bull. Untreated, this situation alone is an incalculable drag on economic and social and civic progress. Why? Because success in the workplace and the community stands on the shoulders of successful learning in formal and informal programs. You cannot have one without the other. You can skim your talent from the top, and you can recruit talent away from your competitors. But that is a struggle that is defined by scarcity, a scarcity that ignores the most dangerous and difficult reality. We need many more workers and people who can step up to the challenges of the 21st century. So we must find answers of quality to the question, how do children learn effectively and well with fewer or even without trained teachers? That is the difficult question we face. Poor participation and learning rates, and I've got to back it up, in hard-to-learn areas. We need to rethink our approaches to teaching and learning in hard-to-learn areas such as math and science and technology. Too often the subjects are offered like a dose of castor oil, assumed to be difficult, with a high failure rate being part of the reality of teaching difficult subjects. Drawing on advances in cognitive science and emerging modalities for delivering learning, curricula and pedagogies can be adapted to the learning style of the individual learner, creating much more success while maintaining high standards. The academic structure of knowledge does not fit the real world of practical application in too many cases in a fast and innovative environment. When I served as founding president of the California State University of Monterey Bay, we learned an important lesson. Representatives from Silicon Valley companies told us that they wanted us to educate students to be, quote, everything but an engineer. Their complaint was that the licensed engineers they got needed retraining immediately and were not ready for the real work that awaited them. They suggested that we forego engineering programs and educate people to use knowledge to solve problems up to, but not at the level of engineer and in practical learning programs. Their theory was, you will do and behave as you are taught. And if we want people to be creative at work, customer-oriented, looking around the corner, then we need to encourage them to do and be those things in their learning environment. Universities face a fundamental challenge to their core identity, and I would include vocational and technical education in this. Consider the following two examples. First, in a world where content is ubiquitous and ever-expanding, what has happened to universities, vocational technical centers, and other schools' traditional role as the gatherer, organizer, and presenter of content through curriculum? Can universities and voc tech centers retain their monopoly as the lead provider of verified content through curriculum? I believe the answer is no, they cannot. Universities as well as TVET providers have to rethink their approach to curricula and pedagogy, seeking the experts where they are, focusing on learning outcomes designed to achieve both through pedagogy and content the intellectual and substantive learning goals set out in advance. In a world where the pace of change is ever increasing, can universities and vocational technical schools afford to reinvest in modern equipment at rates high enough to stay at the leading edge of technology and knowledge, so their graduates enter the workforce with the right grounding in new applications and technologies? I would submit to you the answer is no, they cannot. The rate of public capitalization to keep schools on the cutting edge simply cannot keep up with the pace of change, innovation, and the expense of capitalization that only companies in the front line can afford to do. We need new forms of public and private and multi-stakeholder partnerships which will include, in addition to the private sector, civil society inputs. And in these partnerships, we need to develop centers of excellence at our universities and vocational centers, some of them in the business place, some of them on the campuses. We also focus on the resource that the private sector, innovation and recapitalization driven by the marketplace has. Universities cannot, and vocational centers cannot proceed independently and survive. Don't just increase trained intelligence, deepen intellectual capacity. This requires working purposefully on creating curricula and learning environments where those characteristics are rewarded and enhanced. Schools and universities say they want students to think for themselves, to be critical thinkers, to be problem solvers, to work well on teams. They say they want their graduates to be able to apply what they know and continue to learn. Too often, however, the curriculum that is taught emphasizes mainly the internalization and regurgitation of information and concepts. I call this trained intelligence. It won't be sufficient in the knowledge society if schools and universities do not lay the requisite base for content and intellectual orientation. The already significant costs associated with retraining will continue to expand. If we want TVET graduates to be able to think critically, then we have to ask them to do it and reward it academically. If we want professionals who are university graduates to work effectively on teams, then we have to reward and require it as part of their study. There's an old saying that I'm familiar with, you have probably heard, that we hire for skills, but we fire for behavior. The problem is right on the college transcript in most cases. A compilation of subject matters and grade, how the student did in school. Nowhere does it focus on behavior. Nowhere on the intellectual ability that underlies the fruitful use and employment of knowledge. We are left to our imaginations and what conclusions can be drawn from an interview to make our decision. This is not a path to the knowledge society. Where will we get the workers? Well, the work of reforming school is never done. Korea has accomplished this so well, there needs to be a vision for continuous improvement, always managing your failures towards success in the future. This is the work of generations. Where will the new workers come from? Look at the resources right in front of us. Consider the workplace as a source of talent, often concealed, as well as the workplace itself as the primary laboratory for learning. Consider non-formal and experiential learning developed at work or in other settings as legitimate for advanced standing towards degrees and certificates. Make the problems faced at work the content of the curriculum. Involve workers in the design and implementation of their training and education. Research shows that knowledge gained from interactive learning formats is retained longer, used more, and used better. And lastly, we need to break down the barriers between learning and work so that learners can move effortlessly back and forth without hindrance. Indeed, that was a key recommendation emerging from the Second International Congress on Technical and Vocational Education held right here in Seoul in 1999. Finally, we need policies, investments, and practices that open the closed doors of educational practices. Quality learning for all, and a diversity of practice in the educational marketplace that rewards deep learning and effectiveness. Within this new environment for effective learning, there are policies that need to be considered. International protocols need to be strengthened that allow certificates and degrees to travel with the graduate wherever he or she goes. The day must end when professional competence is lost and left at a national border. Second, the largest and most accessible tool of unrecognized talent today is already in the workforce. If existing workers can have the skills and abilities they have developed non-formally and informally at work recognized, two things will happen. There will be an explosion of capacity as skills are recognized and rewarded, and as existing employees move up the career ladder, spaces for others to work will be created along with higher effectiveness and efficiency in the workplace. The demand for new intellectual and human capital, coupled with an exploding supply of techniques and modalities for delivering high-quality education services, create an irresistible force for change and quality throughout the field of education and business. I'm confident that we will pay sufficient attention to emerging technologies and the research of the profile of the new demand for intellectual capital, as well as the skills that support it. We will fail, however, in the long run if we view education simply as a means to an economic end, or if we believe that the educational needs of the emerging populations, including the workforce in question, will be met primarily with conventional approaches. We must work together, education, business, government, and society at large, join hands in a new partnership that includes a free flow of expertise and teaching, new curricula, access to cutting-edge appropriate technology and research as never before to bring best practices and improved results for many learners currently marginalized. UNESCO can and will work with any and all interested to identify and disseminate new best practices in public-private partnerships for education, teaching and learning, IT modalities, and other areas. Working together, we can create a climate of confidence and new approaches to teaching and learning through research and best practice development. The personal, social, environmental, and civic dimensions of the educational enterprise are all contained in the strategy for economic success. They are pillars of the sustainable model of development towards which we are moving. Those who understand it and act aggressively will have successfully grabbed the bull by the horns. They will look back in a generation's time to see the seamless link between quality education for all and the workforce of the future, healthy and stable societies. I look forward to working with you on this important challenge. Thank you.
이렇게 네 분의 전문가를 모시고 얘기를 듣다 보니까 시간이 주어진 시간보다 5분이 지났습니다. 그래서 제가 지금 12시 55분입니다만 맡고 있는 직권으로서 한 분의 질문만 받고 종료하겠습니다. 그래야 여러분 점심이 또 귀중하게 또 좋은 시간이 될 테니까요. 질문 한 분만 해주시겠습니까? 네, 저쪽에 계신 한 분. 네. 마이크 좀 갖다 주시죠. 네. 자, 본인 소개하시면서 질문해 주십시오.
안녕하십니까. 저는 한양대학교 학생입니다. 먼저 네 분 강연 너무 잘 들었고요. 사와 쿠니코 전 회장님께 질문을 드리고 싶습니다. 발표하신 내용에 저는 전적으로 동감을 합니다. 이런 인재를 어떻게 양성하고 훈련해야 하는가 하는 방법론적인 것보다 더 근본적인 문제를 짚어주셨다고 생각을 하는데요. 전 한국의 대학생으로서 이런 가치관을 가지는 인재가 되기 위해서는 어떤 노력을 해야 하는지 먼저 조언을 부탁을 드리고요. 또 두 번째, 여기 기업의 인사팀에서도 많이 오신 걸로 아는데 기업의 입장에서는 이러한 인재를 어떻게 판단할 수 있는지 또 질문을 드리고 싶습니다.
私が、今日の講演で申し上げたことはこれは本当は、大学で学ぶというよりもですね、もっと小さい時から家庭で両親の下であるいは学校、それも幼稚園であるとか小学校であるとか早い段階からですね、こういう人間にとって大事なことを教えるということが大事だと思います。それからすでに大学生になられた方、今のご質問の方、今までですね、もし今日の私の話したようなことについて、あまり学ぶ機会がなかったと、共感する、そういうチャンスが少なかったとしたらですね、私は大学の先生であるとか、友人であるとか、そういう中にやはり同じような価値観を持った人がいると思いますので、そういう人たちとよく話をして、自分の考えを身につけていくというか、そういうものの考え方を身につけていくということが大事ではないかというふうに思います。また企業の人事担当の人がですね、こういうものの考え方をした人を見分ける、これは、まずですね、企業の人事担当の人自身がこういう価値観、人生観を持っていなければ見分けられないわけでして、そういう意味では、私の自分自身の経験を申し上げれば、私は経営者として社長として、自分の企業の中で、折に触れてもうしょっちゅうですね、こういうことを言い続けるということで、同じ価値観を持ってもらうという努力をいたしました。人事担当の人間もですね、私ども経営者のものの考え方に共感を持ってくれれば、同じ目で人を見ることができるというふうに思います。まあやはり日頃からのそういうものの価値観であるとか人生観であるとかというものをきちんと持たせるということが非常に大事ではないかというふうに思います。
예, 고맙습니다. 이제 끝내야 될 시간이 왔습니다. 오늘 네 분의 전문가가 발표하셨는데 공교롭게라기보다는 아주 체계적인 계획에 의해서 네 분이, 한 분은 그 국제기관에서 교육을 맡으시고, 또 한 분은 정부에서 교육을 맡으시고, 또 한 분은 기업에서 교육을 맡으시고, 또 한 분은 컨설팅 회사 입장에서 그 인재를 제공해주는 그런 네 분의 아주 다양한 시각이 한 자리에 어울렸습니다. 근데 네 분의 시각을 종합해 보면은, 우선 그 유네스코에서 오신 우리 스미스 총장님은 이 새로운 세상 속에서 이 새로운 판이 필요하고 제도가 필요하고 프로세스가 필요한데, 이러한 문제를 정면으로 받아내고 새로운 교육 시스템으로 만들어야 된다는 말씀하셨고, 우리 정부를 대표하시는 그 하더 장관께서는 이 구체적인 새로운 시스템으로서 플렉시큐리티, 유연한 안정성을 이라는 제도를 보여주시면서, 여기에는 아주 꾸준한 노력과 또 상당한 투자가 필요함을 말씀하셨습니다. 기업을 대표하시는 우리 사와 회장님께서는 정말 이 인재라는 게 어떤 전문적인 능력도 필요하지만 그 이전에 이 철학적인 정신 자세, 특히 우리가 어떻게 살아야 되고 어떤 목적으로 우리가 일을 하는가에 있어서 나 자신의 개인적인 동기보다는 이 사회와 더불어 살아가고 환경을 보존하는 그런 큰 시각에서 세상을 바라보고 역할을 하는 인재가 필요하다는 말씀을 하셨고, 또 이 헤일리 사장께서는 이 노령화라는 그 시대에 그 새로운 그 인재의 그 필요성과 함께 총체적인 사고, 그러면서 이 인재 중에서도 이 조직에 대한 커미트먼트를 가지고 이 목적지향적인 목적을 추구하는 그런 사람이 필요하다는 말씀하셨습니다. 이 얘기를 쭉 들으면서 저는 여기에 키워드로 한 4가지 정도가 생각이 났습니다. 우선 첫 번째로는 이 상황 변화에 대한 확실한 인식이 필요하다는 것, 어웨어네스가 필요하다는 거예요. 우리가 그냥 느끼면서 그냥 지나가 버리는 게 아니라 이 변화를 내 거로 알고 정말 나부터가 바뀌어야 되겠다는 그런 인식을 하는 게 첫 번째고요. 두 번째는 이러한 인식에 바탕하여서 행동으로 옮기는 그런 용기가 필요하겠다 하는 그런 용기. 그다음에 세 번째로는 그 용기에 기반 위에서 이 분야의 전문가들이 또 담당자들이 정말 몰입을 해서 이것을 내 것으로 알고 남이 해줄 것을 기대할 것이 아니라 나부터 바로 이러한 새로운 세상에 새로운 능력을 가진 인재를 만들어내고 또 스스로 그런 인재가 되는 그런 몰입이 필요하고, 마지막으로 4번째로는 이러한 분들이 함께 모여가지고 예컨대 정부와 기업과 또 컨설팅 회사와 이런 다양한 조직이 한 방향으로 힘을 합쳐서 그 연대를 해나가는 이런 역할이 필요하지 않을까 하는 생각이 들었습니다. 그래서 이 공교롭게 이 4가지가 다 첫 번째는 awareness, 인지고, 두 번째는 뭐 bravity라고 표현할까요? 용기. 세 번째는 commitment. 그 다음에 이제 4번째는 그 detailed execution. 그래서 A, B, C, D, E로 한번 정리를 해봤는데요. 바로 오늘 이렇게 전문가들의 그 탁견을 우리가 함께 듣고 이것을 그냥 흘려서 지나갈 것이 아니라 정말 나 스스로 내 주변부터 이러한 변화의 주체가 될 수 있는 그런 행동으로 옮기는 것이 오늘 이 세션에 우리가 배워야 할 그런 레슨이라고 생각합니다. 여러분 이 긴 시간을 한 분도 떠나지 않으시고 이렇게 집중하신 이 자세에서 대한민국의 미래가 아주 밝다는 것을 느끼면서 오늘 이 시간을 끝내도록 하겠습니다. 감사합니다.